Computer science is one of the most popular college degrees today, and for the last 2 years I've been studying it. So I thought that, at this halfway point, it might be nice to discuss what I've done so far, both as an overview of the degree path for people interested in studying CS, as well as a bit of reflection for myself. I'll divide this video into different parts for each semester that I did to make it easier to follow. I'll mainly focus on the coursework since I put computer science in the title, but I'll also talk about some other things that were important. With all that out of the way, let's get started with my first semester. Freshman year. What an interesting time. This semester was a pretty big adjustment for me. I didn't realize just how different living on my own would be until I moved in. Fortunately, the classes weren't that hard, so that made adapting easier. For each semester, I'll list the classes that I took on the screen like this and go through and describe each one. I imagine you care the most about coding, so I'll start with the Introductory Computer Science class. In this class, we learned the basics of object-oriented programming using Java. The class technically started from the very beginning, but I feel like if you took this class without ever having code before, things wouldn't really end that well, because this class was kind of difficult at times. We had a project and a lab due basically every week, and there was also a decent amount of reading to do. While in retrospect, this class wasn't really that bad, this was not the easy introduction to coding that some people might have anticipated. In fact, this class is pretty notorious at my school as a weed-out class, and I can kind of see why. Personally, I actually enjoyed this class, but that could have been because I had some prior coding experience, and I had also reviewed the W3 School's Java tutorial during the summer break before the semester started. If you have the opportunity to take AP Computer Science A instead of getting this credit in university, I'd recommend that, not just because this could be a weed-out class, but also because you could get a better idea of if computer science is right for you before college starts. Next up, chemistry. This might seem like a weird requirement. Trust me, I've heard that a lot. But for one reason or another, the computer science major at my school has a science requirement, which basically boils down to taking some chemistry and physics. This class was pretty much just what you would learn in a high school chemistry class. Not even AP chemistry, I'm talking 10th grade chemistry class level stuff. We spent a surprising amount of time on really basic stuff like protons, neutrons, and electrons. Of course, it got more complicated over time, but I still felt like the content was pretty easy, which is funny because I heard from others that this class caused them to drop out of my school's engineering program. Now, while I wouldn't understand them dropping out due to the course content, the chemistry labs were more of a hassle. Each week, we had to either answer some questions or do a write-up related to the lab. But often, these questions and write-ups were on content that we hadn't even learned from the lecture or the lab itself. I found myself having to go to office hours a lot for help, but fortunately the TAs were very helpful. That's another piece of advice. Make sure you go to office hours if you're stuck. Similarly to AP Computer Science, I'd recommend you try to do AP Chemistry to get the credit before college. Apparently AP Chem is really hard, but the credit will be useful for pretty much any college major related to science or engineering. Trust me, you'll be glad you got it out of the way early on. The other classes here aren't really that important, so I'll skim over them. First, I did some required introductory engineering class that was kind of dumb and not that relevant to CS, but there's no way to get around it, so oh well. Next, Multivariable Calculus. This was a major requirement, and there isn't really anything special about it. It's just doing derivatives and integrals of equations with more than one independent variable. My professor was pretty good though, so that's a positive. Finally, I took an easy, asynchronous online Gen-ed class. Something notable about my schedule is that I only had to take a few Gen-eds at university, because I took a lot of AP classes in high school, and my college is really generous with accepting transfer credits. From speaking with friends, it seems like other colleges aren't as helpful, and they had to take a lot of random classes. That's why I think you should consider transfer credit policies when making an admissions decision. Outside of classes, I spent a lot of time this first semester trying to find my place on campus. Before college, I skimmed through the list of clubs at my university and found several that were interesting. Once I arrived, I began showing up to meetings for a bunch of different clubs, gradually figuring out which ones were the best for me. Of course, I didn't have a great time in every club, but I eventually found a few that worked out. If you're looking for friends in college, I'd say that extracurriculars are a great place to start. By my spring semester of freshman year, I felt like I had more or less gotten used to how college works. I had become an officer of one club and was starting to get involved in another, which I am currently an officer of. I think I had more work to do this semester, but the classes still weren't that bad. The computer science class I took this semester was sort of an introduction to data structures. For those of you who don't know, data structures are basically different ways that you can store, manipulate, and retrieve information on a computer. Overall, this class wasn't really that bad, and I definitely didn't see it as a weed-out class. Most of the projects were pretty easy, but the last project was noticeably harder because we had to design the whole structure of our program ourselves using a UML diagram. I thought this was kind of a fun challenge though. Since I mentioned chemistry second last time, let's go over this semester's science course, physics. And yeah, this class was really just your typical first semester physics class, probably because it was a first semester physics class. I actually did dual enrolled physics in high school, but I didn't get transfer credit because the physics I did was algebra based, while the credit that I needed was calculus based. Of course, the calculus part didn't really come into play that much, except for conceptually understanding how the formulas were derived. Like chemistry, I don't think I liked this class that much, but I enjoyed getting to do some more complicated math than what was present in chemistry. The bright side is that the labs for this class were way easier. In fact, people would usually end up finishing their write-ups and leaving early, without having to do anything outside of class. I also did the second semester of that introductory engineering course I mentioned earlier. This time around, we focused on doing a single project for the whole semester, which was actually less bad than it sounds, but regardless, I'm still glad that I'm done with that. The math class I took this semester was Discrete Math. This class basically just revolves around doing a ton of proofs. I remember having to write whole paragraphs for 3 separate questions on a single homework assignment. Additionally, our professor preferred for us to type up our homework using this program called LaTeX, which was kind of weird to figure out. While dealing with proofs was definitely annoying at times, I'm glad that I took this class before linear algebra because it gave me a better conceptual understanding of how the language of math works. Also, the concepts that I learned in this class have definitely been useful in later courses, like data structures and algorithms. Discrete math classes can definitely vary from university to university, though. I've heard from others that their classes were more computer science focused, so try to look into what your university offers if you can. The last class I took this semester was public speaking to fulfill a Gen-ed requirement. In this class, you surprisingly get to do some public speaking. The class revolved around preparing and delivering 5 different speeches. You could choose your topic, but the instructor told you what type of speech it had to be, like discussing the pros and cons of some subject. I get why a lot of people might not like this class because public speaking can be stressful, and I was talking to like 20 different people during these speeches, so it definitely did get stressful at times. But I more felt that this class was kind of just a hassle. We could only hold a few note cards while presenting, so I had to more or less memorize what I wanted to say, and that took a lot of practice. However, I also definitely learned some good practices for public speaking, which I'll probably end up using in the future. So, I guess that's a good thing. So, that's about it for the classes for this semester, but I thought it might be a good idea to talk about what I did over the summer break after this semester. During this break, I did a software engineering internship with a pretty big company you've definitely heard of before. I got to go in person to their offices, sit in on actual team meetings, and also work on my own coding project for the company. I felt like this was a good opportunity, especially because I was getting paid pretty well, and housing was provided by the company. When I had downtime during the day, I would learn new coding concepts from a robust learning platform that the company gave us access to. Outside of work, I got to do a few different fun things with my coworkers and explore the city that I was in. I also did a class online through my local community college in my downtime to get ahead of my degree roadmap. Obviously, if you can get an internship, I'd recommend doing it, but it's not really that simple nowadays. I'm not going to pretend to be the be-all, end-all guide for how to get an internship. Honestly, I feel like luck probably played a role in getting it. However, if you can do some coding projects on your own time, that would definitely be helpful. Also, make sure to join your college's job board, since companies will often post things there that aren't open to the general public. In fact, the internship that I did was one of those postings restricted to college job boards. Finally, just apply to a lot of different things. This internship was the very last one I applied to, after applying to a bunch of other ones and getting rejected from each one. But other than that, I can't guarantee you will get an internship your freshman or even sophomore year. Most people only do one the summer after their junior year. But if you can get one, it's admittedly pretty nice. Now, let's move on to the fall semester of my sophomore year. At this point, I had narrowed down the set of extracurriculars that I enjoyed, becoming an officer of one club that allowed me to get hands-on experience, managing a jumbled system of Linux servers that are used to deploy a bunch of different pieces of software. I've also been able to go to a lot of fun events through this club, which reminds me of another big piece of advice for college. Please, do fun stuff. Don't just study or play games. Go hiking, go to concerts, stuff like that. You won't regret it. Anyways, no more fun, time for classes. First, this semester I was officially a CS major, so I got to take a grand total of 2 computer science classes. First, I'll talk about the introductory C programming class. Yes, up until this point, I had been using Java, so now it was time to learn about Java's polar opposite. The first major difference between the two is that C doesn't really have support for object-oriented programming, while Java completely revolves around it. Object-oriented programming is a really weird concept, but in essence, instead of functions existing on their own, you can bundle them into objects that can also have attributes. If you don't know what that means, that's fine, it's not really the point. What matters is that writing C code is a completely different process, since you're no longer using objects to organize your code. The other big difference is that Java handles the process of allocating and deallocating memory for you, while in C, you have to manage memory manually. While manual memory management is more efficient in theory, it can also lead to a ton of glitches. If you don't know what segfault and memory leak mean now, you definitely will after having taken this class. In the later portion of the class, we focused more on working with assembly instructions. Each line of assembly represents one processor instruction, and the C code that you write is transformed into assembly by the C compiler. Why wouldn't you just write assembly code then, you might ask? Well, it's because assembly code is really complicated. Despite that, I still think it's kind of cool to learn how processors actually understand code. And also, reading assembly kind of feels like solving an interesting puzzle. Overall, I really enjoyed this class, especially since the class centered around using the Linux terminal, which I already had a lot of experience with at this point. The other CS class I took this semester was basically an overview of a bunch of different concepts in computer science. My opinions on this are kind of mixed. On the one hand, we did cover some concepts that were pretty interesting to me. However, I often felt that the class didn't go into enough detail because of the sheer amount of content we needed to cover before the semester was over. Also, This wide range of content made the midterm and final pretty difficult. I think this class might be specific to my university though, so I'll just move on to the next class I took, Combinatorics. In this class, we first discussed solving combinatorics problems, where you need to find the total number of arrangements or choices in some situation. The second part of the class revolved around graph theory, which I found to be a lot more useful for my major, since graphs are very common in computer science. This class was difficult, but also fair, and I did well since I focused on learning the content and doing practice problems to prepare for tests. The other math class that I took was linear algebra, which basically revolves around doing stuff with matrices. If you don't know what a matrix is, it's this. This class isn't that hard, but the concepts can be difficult to grasp at times. I might make a video sometime in the future explaining an idea that took me a while to figure out. Finally, I took a personal finance class, which was pretty easy, but did teach me some useful concepts that I've begun to apply in my own life, such as, unfortunately, how to file your taxes. Well, we finally arrived at my most recent semester, sophomore spring semester. This semester, I was starting to take some classes that would supposedly be significantly harder than what I had done before. As a result, I chose to take 12 credit hours instead of what I had been doing for the last 3 semesters, which was at least 15 hours. This course load worked out fine for my degree path because I'm currently ahead of schedule due to AP and transfer credits, as mentioned earlier. I took 2 CS classes this semester, the first of which was the infamous Data Structures and Algorithms, more commonly known online as DSA. And yeah, in this class, we pretty much learned about data structures and algorithms, surprisingly. But the hard part of this class wasn't really the content, especially because the tests were honestly kind of easy. No, the challenge was that we had to do a few projects that applied what we learned in class, and these projects were pretty conceptually challenging, and required me to think a lot about what I was doing. These projects took a lot longer to complete than anything I had been assigned in previous classes, but fortunately I always started and finished the projects early, which made it easier for me to go at office hours for help as needed. If you're trying to prepare for technical interviews, this class isn't really Technical Interview 101, but you will definitely learn a lot of concepts that you need to understand if you want to be a software engineer. The other supposedly hard CS class that I took was Computer Architecture, which started at Assembly, where last semester's class left off, and then went to lower levels of abstraction. And yeah, it got a little weird. For example, we had to learn the meaning of every single wire of this mess. Yeah, I'm serious. This took a while to figure out, as you can assume. Then, we learned how processors work using stuff like pipelining and caching. Next, we touched on virtual memory, which allows programs to have their own memory address space that translates to a different location of RAM or the disk. Finally, we learned the basics of how a program can run in parallel, which, to oversimplify, means you distribute the work for a program across multiple processors. At this point, I'm not really sure how useful this class will be to me. During the semester, I was kind of annoyed with the level of detail that we were going into for super low-level concepts that I didn't think would ever be of use in the future. But now that the class is over and I understand better the big picture of computer architecture, I think I could benefit from it. Because while I think an understanding of lower level details could influence how you write higher level code, so far I haven't done that myself while coding. However, I think that might change next semester once I take a particularly difficult class that deals with writing code for lower level applications. Regardless, knowing how computers actually work is pretty cool in my eyes. This semester, the math class that I took was Differential Equations. Now, this class is not actually required for a computer science major at my school, but I still did it because I am pursuing a math minor, which requires differential equations. In this class, we learned different methods for solving equations that contain derivatives of a function. That might sound kind of weird, and that's because it is. But a way you could think about it is, You know how with simple equations you're solving for a number that you can plug in to get 0 equals 0? Well, you do the same thing with differential equations by solving for a function of an independent variable t that you can plug in for y to get 0 equals 0. This class was pretty interesting, but also somewhat tedious at times. I guess that's just how math goes. Even if I don't really get any practical use out of this math minor in the future, I don't think I'll regret taking it, because I enjoy learning complicated math concepts like this. The last class I took this semester was to fulfill some English requirement for the CS major. In this class, we did a few projects where we worked with different digital formats, like writing a blog post and making a short video. This class was pretty easy for me since I already had experience with the programs we used for the projects. In fact, this class was probably the reason that I decided to make this video, since it reminded me why I liked making YouTube videos in the past. So yeah, if you've learned something from this video, you have this class to thank. Okay, so that's it. That's all the classes I've taken so far for my computer science major. There's a lot more to go though. Maybe I'll make a part 2 in the future after I've graduated. If you have any questions about computer science, please feel free to put them in the comments below. Regardless, I hope you took something away from this video, and thanks for watching.